A pleasant day to you. My name is Kimline Phillip, and I'm the founder and managing director for Repair of Hearts Foundation, a non-governmental organization in the beautiful Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, where we seek to work with at-risk, vulnerable, and displaced women, children, and teenagers. And our mission is one that simply seeks to provide advocacy, education, social assistance, as well as transitional housing. And we are here today as we are seeking to just, fulfill this mandate where we want to provide the necessary education to allow you to really be able to overcome life, as quite often we are plagued with so many challenges that will face us on a daily basis. And prior to COVID, we would have dealt with some face-to-face emotional as well as mental solutions. And with COVID intervening, we are now engaging with technology more so, where we are having these sessions on a virtual platform. So today you're on Facebook or YouTube, and we want to say welcome. Welcome to our session. We are discussing a series where we title Creating a Safer Place for Our Boys and Girls. We are bombarded with so much violence that is taking place with our boys and our girls, and by extension, even our women and our men. And we want to really talk about it. So our first episode, we focus on where everything began. And we would have invited a clinical therapist, none other than Natalie O'Brady McDowell, along with Adrian Alexander, a director at CURB, as well as a consultant. And they would have really spoken and highlighted that where we need to begin this discussion is within the home. And coming out of that discussion, there were some things that, I just want, it will indeed be our launching pad for today's discussion, where we want to focus on resilience in the face of adverse childhood experiences. So Natalie O'Brady McDowell, she would have stated that the home ought to be a place where an individual will escape to if the environment outside of the home is toxic, unhealthy, or even dangerous. And what can be said is that even as Repair of Hearts Foundation works with several at-risk, vulnerable, and displaced, we are discovering more and more that the home is not indeed that healthy or that safe place. And many are talking about, being overcome, though, even with a childhood or adverse childhood experiences. She would have further stated that adverse childhood experiences has and does impact us negatively. It affects our decision making, person's ability to cope, as well as their philosophy in life. And as such, they engage with society in the way dealt that hand. So today we would have none other than Miss Dorsha Charles. And Dorsha Charles, we call her a young, resilient warrior. I just want to read her bio. So she's the founder and managing director for Survivor Scholars. She's a young youth leader. She is a change maker. She for students who have a balance between their mental health and well-being with their academic achievement. Survivor Scholars is a support that empowers and equips students with the tools and techniques needed to cope with challenges they face in school and life so they can build their resilience. So today we want to focus on resilience. Through Survivor Scholars, Dorsha Charles uses various art forms to empower, engage, educate, and children. She uses puppets, poetry, music, art, and drama as a means to relay real-life social stories into resilience, social and emotional learning for ages 5 to 23 years old. Dorsha describes herself as a lifelong learner, seeks to continually update her skills in every opportunity that she gets. And Dorsha journeys, can be described as through struggles where she was able to overcome many obstacles that came on her path. And Dorsha has over 7 with experience working with young people, where she has been able to inspire them, motivate them, and impact thousands of youths to date through her various community engagement, through her voluntary experience, by her organization, as well as the boards to which she have served. All right, she would have served having been at coordinating camps, youth councils, motivational speeches, one-on-one discussions, webinars, and workshops with young people. So even though you see the lady, you're probably wondering how old she is, but she has a wealth of experience, very competent and very humble indeed. And Dorsha is on a mission to build more resilient students by helping them surmount their struggles to strive in their studies and school journey to become success stories. And even as we look at Dorsha did become a success story, not succumbing to her struggles, but indeed allowing those struggles to indeed catapult her to a place where now she can bring more strength and hope and guidance. And today we want to welcome Dorsha as she comes to really talk on the topic of how to be resilient face adverse childhood experiences. So Dorsha, welcome to Repair of Hearts Foundation, and it's really a blessing to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here. Yes.
So Dorsha, you describe yourself as a resilient warrior. What is a resilient warrior?
I would say that a resilient warrior is someone who openly receives and accepts life challenges, changes, or difficult circumstances in their life, but they do not allow it to define them. Instead, they use it as a means to rise. Rise about those challenges. Keep focused on them to be successful.
Awesome. And indeed, even as you have termed yourself as a resilient warrior, and as for the time that I've known you, I can that indeed you are such an inspiration. And even as we explore the topic today of resilience in the face of adverse childhood experiences, let's probably just start a discussion as to what we would have heard from both Adrian Alexander as well as O'Brady McDowell in our first episode, where we began this discussion. But for you, what is ACEs? What is this? In terms of when we talk about this ACEs, so where we say in terms of it, adverse childhood experiences, what it is exactly. Seeing that you are working with children and young people, let's hear it from a young.
Okay, so I would say ACE, from studies and from experience, is more or less another term used for trauma, the challenges that children face at a young age that are traumatic to them.
Great. I know indeed there are several causal factors, and I know you have a presentation today, so now I just hand it over for you to share your presentation with the general public.
Okay, sure. Okay, so today we'll be looking at resilience in the face of adverse childhood experiences. And also in my bio, I forgot to mention that I am a crisis management specialist from the American School Counselors Association, ASCA. And this has definitely added to my knowledge in the field of resilience and trauma. So trauma. So I would say from research and the studies within the courses say that trauma begins when an event or experience overwhelms normal coping mechanisms. So it's like overwhelming. It's too much for our nervous system to and therefore we do not display normal coping mechanisms. And when we say normal coping mechanisms, we mean that responses that have a sense of control, connection, meaning, and safety. If it doesn't have any of these factors, then it isn't a normal coping response. So trauma responses are natural responses to protect ourselves and how we see best in terms of dealing with ACE or at all. And it isn't just to label it as good or bad, but our natural response to that traumatic event experiencing. And so let's look at this wonderful diagram that I really, really love to refer to always when I'm doing any presentation on ACE, trauma, and so forth. And so we're looking at the different forms of adverse childhood experiences, and they can be seen on the screen. I hope it's left for you as well. In terms of abuse, three types of abuse in terms of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. Then you have neglect in terms of emotional and physical neglect. So whether a parent abandons a child from a young age, or they do not attend to a child's emotional needs. For instance, when a child is crying and the parent just be like, shut up, and allow that child to cry, or sometimes they stop the child from crying and tell them if they cry more they will get licks. So those are different ways that children face emotional neglect and physical neglect or abandonment. And then there's the household challenges in terms of domestic violence, children, uh, parents fighting and getting into arguments, substance abuse of parents, whether they're using drugs, alcohol, parent has a mental illness. Parental separation and divorce is one of the major form of adverse childhood experiences, because many children they are unable to that difference in how their parents are, how they see their parents. So when there's this separation, the child really, really has a difficult time dealing with that loss and separation. And there's the incarcerated parent, a parent who goes into jail for whatever reason. That is also adverse childhood experience. And so, from this diagram, we can see adverse childhood experiences means traumatic events that can have negative effects on health and well-being. Yeah, and there are many effects of adverse childhood experiences on children, and these, as we look on the right hand side, um, the level three times the amount of lung diseases. And again, because what happens is that when children face adverse childhood experiences, they tend to adapt towards the negative coping mechanisms, because those coping mechanisms are prominent. They are really mainstream in terms of the music, in terms of what happens in our environment. And so most times what's negative coping mechanisms like drug abuse, sexual involvement, getting involved in gang violence, crime, missing school, um, acting out in school, having outbursts, getting into fights. Most times they're labeled as the trouble in school, and we'll get into that later on. But these are the facts about the adverse childhood experiences. It increases 14 times the number of times, 4.5 times more likely to develop depression, um, 2 times the level of liver disease, 11 times the level of use. And these are the different experiences that young people face when they are unable to adapt to positive, healthy coping. And I like to say, or I like to ask, who teaches our children positive coping mechanisms? Yeah, there are not schools or avenues for our children to learn positive coping mechanisms, even from our parents, from the parents themselves. They also are unable to teach their children positive coping mechanisms. And so that is why, due to the music that our children listen to, due to the things that are prominent in the newspaper and wherever, they more stem towards negative coping mechanisms that are played in the music and seen in their environment. And uh, their adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. And that is true. It's a great our entire world today. And when we say public health, we refer to the facts above in terms of dealing with suicide, ideation, depression, anxiety, and these different things. Because health is the main foundation of anything that we do to be certain to have that longevity. Yeah. And so it's also stated that people with 6 or more ACE can years earlier than those who have none. And this is something that we definitely need to look at. It's um, other children or persons are not prone to, because I haven't experienced sick will share the link with the ACE test for you in the link in the live comment. Someone having experienced 6 that it is a possibility, but you are not prone towards that lifestyle. You can be the change. You can make that change in your life, that you are not susceptible to these challenges. And additionally, um, other ACE we want to cover in the ACE includes bullying, poverty, peer rejection and having no friends, so being a loner, experiences of racism, death, uh, and multiple traumatic losses, community violence, poverty, the experience of the care system like unhealthy uh, health care, poor academic performance, and living in an unsafe environment. Um, Let me see, I think I got something in my chat here. Okay, so yeah, she shared the ACE, the survey. And so looking at this module, remember I said before that I had 6 of the adverse childhood experiences before. I have also experienced numerous additions of the ACE format in terms of bullying, that experience of poverty, living in an unsafe environment, the death of my father, peer rejection, and having no friends. I was once a loner. Communications, um, in addition to living in an unsafe environment. So to understand fully how trauma affects us, we need to look at trauma and brain development. And so when trauma is experienced at a young age, we see that compared to the normal development of a brain, first there's the development of cognition, social emotional learning, meaning being able to control one's emotions and behavior, and then there's the survival aspect of the brain. But in a trauma developed brain, there is a smaller portion to the cognition, because what happens is that in trauma, the brain is more in a survival state, and so that aspect of the brain is tremendously. And then there's the regulation, and then there's the social and emotional. So there's less social and emotional learning skills, and there's less regulation, and there's a smaller aspect for cognition, because the brain is more so focusing on survival, and you can't it's focus on survival and cognition simultaneously. And so this is why that aspect of the brain is underdeveloped. And in terms of trauma and brain development, um, there's a double rate of learning disability due to that, cognition being a small aspect developed in the brain. There's impaired control of emotions and impulses. So looking at impact of childhood trauma on the different things that we experience: development, behavior, cognition, physical health, emotions, relationship, mental health. So in terms of relationships, there's attachment problems. Um, there are disorders in terms of communicating and relating to others effectively. There's the difficulty relationships. And so, most times you hear persons who have experienced a traumatic childhood will be like, I'm a loner and that's who I am. But honestly, that is a response and developed brain in terms of fear of attaching to other persons, fear of trusting other persons. There's difficulty of controlling one's emotion, trouble recognizing the different emotions that they experience, the lack of coping mechanisms as well. Physical health, there's sleep disorders like insomnia. There's also this disorders relating to eating, healthy eating habits, poor immune system functioning, and also I could attest to experiencing all of these in terms of my journey. If I'm not conscious enough, I will prone to these negative impacts. Being someone who is a trauma survivor, I definitely try to implement ways that I can remember the things that I need to do to ensure that my well-being is maintained. Yeah, these unhealthy habits also worsen or exacerbate through school, because in school they teach us that we must put our academics first, but someone who is experiencing trauma definitely needs to have that balance between their mental health and wellness. And so, though they would say it's midnight candle, um, there definitely needs to be measures in place for that. I would say that I was someone who got up 3 a.m. each morning. Not different aspects of my life, I did different things, and it took time for me to develop the routines that I needed to develop in order to have that balance or to have that health area. Yeah, and so it's not a one-time fix. It's not something that comes by quickly. It does take time. Yeah. Cognition in terms of impaired readiness to learn. So in school, you would hear or realize that some students are very standoffish. They react automatically whenever a teacher calls on them, and they're like, Miss Papa, mom, you always calling me, so and getting up and just pushing the table and stuff like that. And these responses are related to experiencing trauma. The brain development, remember before we looked at the smaller brain size, less efficient processing, impaired stress in terms of brain development and IQ. And the behavior, there's poor self-regulation in terms of being able to control their emotions. So that's why when a teacher calls on a student, the teacher might just flip and just like push the table and be like, Miss Mom, I fed up, are you always calling on me? And the teacher might just be like, guys, but that is actually a trauma response, a fight response in terms of not wanting to deal with that, that anxiety to ask a question. So yeah, in terms of triggers and the trauma responses, so responses does have different triggers, and so the triggers refer to psychological stimulus that prompts or recall the experience someone would have faced. So just like I was explaining in terms of students being rowdy whenever on them, that is actually a trauma response and a trigger example. The trigger is the teacher calling on them, and students who trauma, they feel anxious being like called on or picked on. They feel as though they're being picked on when teachers may be asking them questions, and so their trauma, some of them might be to fight in terms of getting up and just getting on rowdy and stuff, and then some of them just might remain silent and shake their shoulders, and some space and just like stay into space. And so these are examples of how trauma responses relate to and so the other side of trauma, which is resilience. The definition for resilience is not only ability to bounce back from difficulties, but it is also the ability to advance despite of adversities being faced. And my definition as earlier is resilience is the ability to openly accept life's challenges without allowing it to define us and who we are. Instead, we use these challenges and keep focused on our goals for success. And so when we look at resilience in the face of adverse childhood experiences, is definitely something to look at in terms of empowering our young people with resilience and in addition to showing our parents how they are consciously and unconsciously triggering our young people. And when I say triggering, for instance, a parent's unconscious of a child can be calling them out from playing with their friends or interacting with their friends to do a chore or so abruptly. And that can make a child feel really, really, really sad and anxious, and it could cause a traumatic response in terms of response, crying, shouting, and affect that child's development and connection at a young age. Um, Traumatic responses could include triggering children from negative talk, say negative things to children, like you're just like your mother, you're not good enough, or um, calling them names like stupid and dumb and you're good for nothing, and all these different things that parents do. Sometimes is conscious and sometimes unconscious. It's just programmed into them. Maybe they grew up with that experience as well, and it just keeps on going from generation to generation. When resilience comes in, we look at um, dealing with those different triggers and how one can cope with them and know that it doesn't stay up. And it is a process. Resilience is a process. It doesn't come about just like that. And looking at resilience, one of the key aspects is having that positive thinking. No matter what is being said to us, it's so important for us to be able to uh, be aware of our thoughts and what others say to us doesn't define us. So, for instance, for me growing up, I experienced bullying. And so at one point, I really allowed that to sunk in my soul. I really started to attach my identity to what others were saying about me. And it really had me at a low, dark place. And I didn't like how I felt. I had to get out of it. And getting out of it meant that I had to seek help. And the help that I seek was from God. Because everyone else, in terms of like my day, my dad was like, don't be responding to nobody or don't hit nobody back, go to the principal. And that just didn't work. Because I mean when it continues and it doesn't change much, right? So I now had to deal with it for myself, have that, as they like to say, they like to relate resilience, toughness. And so I had to deal with that and get strength from God to cope, learn his identity for who I am. And as I go deeper into my Bible and reading, especially in Genesis, where it said, we were created in his image and likeness. And when I scripture, it really, really, really helped me to know who I am in Christ. And the things that people said about me was not true. It was an example of who they are. And I had to know who I was in Christ. And so unconsciously, when God helped me, I actually stood in front of our at home. This mirror was in our gallery, and it was like right there where people would be passing on the road and stuff like that, cars and stuff, and they could see me. So, but I still went out and like went in front of that mirror, and I didn't even know this was called positive affirmations. But now that I'm doing more research and studies, now I know that it's positive. I went into that mirror and I used to talk to myself. I would talk to myself and say, "You are beautiful," and start to love myself. And then when I start to get that enlightenment, there was different composure with me. Even in school, like going into school, people was like, "Wow, Dosha is glowing," and I felt more confident knowing that has me and has my back. Even while I was studying the word, like I started to go to church often, like every week and stuff, and reading the word, especially Proverbs, because I really love. And I saw, that I saw tools that I could have used. I could have used the scriptures to get rid of that temptation of retaliating to the enemies or the bullies, right? And one of them was like, a soft response um, gets rid of that wrath and helped me to remember and recall that in my mind to know that I don't need to tell them anything whenever they come to me. I can just respond in a calm and manner so that it doesn't stir up more strife. um, so I would recommend and say that definitely seeking God and His word will help in terms of getting those scriptures to use in terms of dealing and coping with those difficulties. God can help us. And what I realize is that when I backslide or whenever I stop reading my Bible or so, definitely I would fall into harm's way, open up myself in terms of the different principalities out there and do the negative things that I for in terms of what we as young people are more prone to doing when we don't have any positive coping mechanisms. So that is one of the experience that I would say that I have with ACE and now the experience and learning resilience and applies to helping a young person to cope and deal with adverse childhood experiences. So yeah, that is my presentation in a nutshell.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you for sharing. You have really shared a lot with regards to, really defining what adverse child experiences are, the various factors. And it's very important for us to know what exactly they are. And I love the way in which you also would have identified, that you made mention with regards to ACE when we say ACE is referring to adverse childhood experiences for our listening audience. And you made mention that ACE is indeed an unaddressed entire world, and that's important for us to note. You and just for someone who probably now came on, can you just tell us why would you state it is an unaddressed threat facing the entire world? So it's not just Trinidad and Tobago, because many times we think, okay, we are a developing nation, and is our boys and girls because with them, is a developing country mindset. But you said
Right.
it's an unaddressed threat, entire world. So explain a little for our listening audience based on what you would have stated there.
Right. So when I say it's an unaddressed public health issue, I mean that no one teaches our young people to cope in a healthy, positive manner. And so we tend towards that negative cope. And the negative coping really affects us. Okay, so for instance, getting involved in sexual activities at a young age definitely opens a young person and make them prone to a lot of diseases. Another example, getting involved into drug abuse or alcohol abuse definitely affects one's lungs and liver and decreases their ability to live a longer life. It can also be that experience, if it's overdosed, where they could have a mental health disorder breakdown. Um, and so, different ways that adverse childhood experiences pose a public health issue to not only our country but the entire world. And once we are able to empower young people with positive coping skills from a young age, such as like journaling, helping us to express our feelings, different breathing techniques, different positive things that helps us, we would now reduce or eliminate that public alarm, because our young people will now, instead of having sex, we would now be using journaling as a positive tool. And so they won't be prone to that diseases. Instead of using drugs and alcohol, they could now use music or art, poetry to now express themselves instead of having liver and lung issues later on, or mental health challenges. Instead of going to gang and violence, they could have a community, a positive support system that they could go to, mentors that they could go to, instead of being later on for a long period of their life. So these are the different ways that we as a country and people can um, work showing that our children maintain their mental health and well-being along their journey, that they cope positively and in a healthy way with the challenges. Parents as well definitely need to ensure that they are not triggering their children, and they consider their child's emotions. When children come to parents with challenges that they're facing, and parents just brush it off and try to cover it up, or say that that is not some big issue, because parents like to compare children to them in terms of saying that our children, they're young, they don't have no stress to deal with, because they say how they don't have no rent to pay, they don't have to work and stuff. But children do have a lot of challenges that we face at a young age, such as trying to form bonds in schools with friends, trying to find our self identity, trying to figure out our purpose, figuring out who we are, schoolwork, dealing with transitioning from one school to the other. There's many challenges we as young people face, coping with stress, coping with anxiety of school, and parents definitely need to learn and recognize that children do face a lot of challenges, although they are young. And it is to be validated, to validate them is okay, to know and to impart that assurance that they are there for them, and be open to dialogue.
Thank you, Dosha. So you might be a parent and you're listening to us, whether on Facebook or on YouTube, and you would have heard Miss Charles, some of these trigger trauma responses, whether the child will want to fight, they want to flee, or they want to freeze. Yeah, these three F's. And even when hearing in terms of her coping mechanism and the way in which she would have gone through her own trauma as a young person, and now how she is, she called herself a resilient warrior. It shows us, and it shows the world, not just saying Trinidad, but in fact the world, that indeed no matter where we would have begin, it doesn't determine our destination. And she would have very much articulated in terms of some of the traumas that or as we identify using the terminology ACE, with referencing in terms of coming from a household where both parents were separated, or some level of divorce, that sort of thing would have taken place. And clearly identifying now some mechanism where we can really engage our young people with regards to community initiatives. You made mention, Dosha, reading your Bible and really seeking God. Those strategies. And even as for those of you who might be listening on the replay, you can go over the information, and even as the wonderful slide presentation that was done as well, identify what are the ACE factors, and even where we would send the ACE survey is going to be there in the link to see very clearly and go through the ACE, where you as an adult, as well as try it on your children and discover where you are at, how many factors that you have represented or being highlighted. All right, so it's something that I personally would have done, and I would like to encourage you as well to get that done, so that you can help your child and in the process help yourself. So if you need any further support, you can reach us at 786-6525. Some flyers on the screen, 786-6525 or 704-9771. So 704-9771. You can check us out as well as on Instagram. Not Instagram, sorry, on YouTube, sorry. And again, if you would like to get in contact with Dorsha Charles, she would also be on our information will be there. Indeed, Dorsha, congratulations. Continue to keep up the excellent job that you're doing through your organization called Survivor Scholars. And indeed, I trust would have shared today would have indeed been very beneficial and impactful, so that as listening parents, you can indeed make a positive, transition, impact them effectively. All right. So thank you again, and do have a great afternoon. Remember, one touch indeed makes a difference.
Thank you so much for having me. And persons can also reach me on our website, which is survivorscholars.com. And my contact number 369-7522. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you again, Dorsha.
Thank you.